Man, I'm so excited about what we're doing this year and this season. And so we figured we'd kick off this season this year with something a little edgy. And so here we go, guys. Samson the Sex Slave. Cue the new intro. Samson was a judge. I mean, just to give you a brief history, when people say Samson, they think, oh, that was the man who was the strong man. He was like kind of like the Hebrew Hercules. You know, he was the one who vowed not to cut his hair. And in obedience to not cutting his hair, cutting his locks, Father gave him super strength. So he was a judge. He was like the Hebrew Hercules. He did have great strength. But he wasn't like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, you know, from that perspective. He wasn't this guy that was walking around all beefy and strong looking. So, because we know that he wasn't, because they said, how or where does your strength come from? So he's probably a normal looking guy, potentially a normal looking guy, potentially not like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, just a normal looking guy with long hair. So we got a backstory on who Samson is. Samson. But fast forwarding now, he ended up with a woman who was paid to vex him, was paid to seduce him, to find out where was this strength coming from. If it wasn't his muscles, if it wasn't from anything that no one had said, so it was some type of secret. So they paid her in silver, this woman named Delilah, to find out where this strength came from. Now, when his enemies were successful, that's the Philistines, when they were successful, we find in the scripture, it says this.
Judges 16:21. But the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house.
Now when we read this, we think this. But there is a second meaning for the word grind. It actually has a euphemism connected to it, which means sex slave. If you want to know why I'm proposing that Samson was a sex slave, you'll have to look at part 2, where I go into the bigger build and the bigger elaborations of Samson the person and the faith. But right now, for this part 1, I just want to deal with the euphemism of the word grind. Euphemism, which is not a common term that we use all the time, euphemism is just a way of softening up something that's harsh or blunt, or could be too direct or too strong. And so instead of saying sex slave, because that seems very harsh and very disgusting and nasty and too blunt and even vulgar, the writers of the canon decided to make it a little bit more vague, a little bit more abstract, and soften it up. And so they use the word grind. Now, I don't want you to think this when we say grind, but really that's what we're talking about. We're talking about like almost like the slang that we say the word grind. In the Hebrew, or in the word in the Strongs, the word grind means concubine. And concubine can be a second wife, but it also can be sex slave. So to build my case for the word grind in this part 1, let's look at some other usages of the word grind. Some other places where grind is used, all right? Let's look at Job 31:9 through 10. And it says,
If mine heart have been deceived by a woman, or if I have laid wait at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind unto another, and let others bow down upon her.
Hold up. What does field work have to do with sex?
The scriptures translation reads, Let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down over her.
So there's still a little ambiguity. There's still some euphemism there. But the easy read version, that they got it pretty close. They said,
then let my wife serve someone else and let other men sleep with her.
Interesting. We have working in the field and sleeping with her. So that kind of points to the direction that grind could be a euphemism for sex slave. Let's look at another usage. Let's look at Lamentations Chapter 5, 11 through 13. And so Lamentations is the book where the prophet is proclaiming his woes of how we as Israel were taken by the Chaldeans. All right. It says,
they ravaged the women in Zion and the maids in the city of Yehuda. Princes are hanged up by their hand. The faces of elders were not honored. They took the young men to grind, and the children fell under the wood.
Let's see. They raped the women, and they gave the young men jobs in the field. That doesn't sound too bad. But let's say this. They raped the women, and they made the young men young boy concubines. Interesting. Sex slaves. My final argument would be, if we look at the final judgment or the final usage of, or the final actions that happened to Samson. If we look at the story, we know that he was put to grind, blinded, put in feathers, and put to grind. But look how the story ended. The story ended with him being tied to a pole. And the Philistines said, hey, yo, we're drinking, we're having a good time, we're partying, we're kicking it. Let's bring Samson out and let him make us sport. Hold on, was he a football player? Did they say, hey, let him come out here and play hockey? Let him come out here and play basketball for us. Let him shoot a few hoops. No, the last time we saw someone using the word sport was when Isaac in Genesis chapter 26, verse 8, when Isaac was caught by Abimelech, maybe? Yeah, Abimelech, the king. He is caught spying on, well, not spying, but he just happened to be looking over and he saw Isaac sporting Ribka. He was sporting his wife. Oh, they were just playing basketball, right? No, he was sporting his wife. And so when they said, bring Samson out here so we can make sport of him, they had him tied to a pole and they were doing what they was already doing before, grinding. If you're not disgusted so far and you want to know the spiritual application on like how does Samson end up being in the hall of faith, how his obedience and disobedience kind of led him in this situation, maybe even seeing some of the plots and why it was necessary for Samson to be a sex slave and how his story of being a sex slave ties in to his story or his moral that Father is trying to get us to learn and see, and how it even ties in with the Torah. Please click on part 2. Don't let it be for naught. Don't let it just be some type of disgusting perverted click. There is a lesson to be learned here, but you gotta click on part 2. I'm HOIO and I'm out.